All right. Hello. Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Very good. Okay. So, on this crisp Thursday morning, we must finish, or try to finish, our discussion of the nature of the mental. This might carry into next week, because we not only have to finish the slides from the first part, but of course the slides that were meant for today. So, what did we cover last time? Well, um, we start off with a sort of overview of various positions, metaphysical positions like dualism and physicalism. Um, so, substance dualism is one type of dualism, which we'll be able to dive a little bit deeper into today, where there exist two different kinds of substances. And we've talked about substances a lot so far in the course, but what we mean when we talk about these two substances in substance dualism are, on the one hand, physical stuff, matter, what Descartes called extended substance, and then the mind, mental substance, what Descartes calls thinking substance. Physicalism is a kind of substance monism, right? And that means that there exists only one kind of substance, one fundamental kind of thing. And on physicalism, or materialism, as it's called in Crumley's book, the only things that exist are natural, physical things, matter, and the properties of matter, energy, like force fields, magnetic fields, electricity, this kind of thing, right? Then we talked a little bit about the knowledge argument against physicalism. We didn't go into too much detail, but this is something that might be on a future quiz or the final exam, right? So you definitely want to pay attention to the knowledge argument against physicalism. And that, of course, comes from Frank Jackson. And part of his knowledge argument is Mary, the color scientist. Remember, we were talking about Mary, who knows every physical fact about color perception, about the brain, every physical fact. But she's raised and has lived her whole life in a black and white room. The question is, when we let Mary out of the room, will she be surprised when she sees color for the first time? Some of you will say yes, she'll be surprised. Some of you will say no. The point of the thought experiment is that if you think that Mary will be surprised, you think that there are more than just physical facts, more than just facts about the physical world, because Mary is surprised when, like, oh, red, wow, I didn't know red would look like that. So Mary's learned something new. So even though Mary knew all of the physical facts, she could not have known everything. And if there are more facts than just physical facts, then physicalism must be wrong. Thus, the knowledge argument against physicalism. If you deny that Mary will be surprised, you're probably a physicalist, but if you think that she will be surprised, you might be a dualist of some kind or another. Not necessarily a substance dualist, but perhaps a property dualist. Okay, so that's about where we left off. A couple of arguments we were about to consider for dualists are the introspection argument and the conceivability argument. So remember, the first one says that our senses tell us about the world. And introspection, which is another kind of sense where we can look inward, tells us about the mental world. And this is illustrated by Leibniz's mill, kind of. Um, if we were to shrink ourselves down and enter into our own brains like we could enter into a giant mill, we wouldn't see thoughts and sensations. We'd merely see physical parts affecting one another, right? So the idea is that there must be something non-physical about the mental. We have to be careful not to lump Leibniz in with the dualists here, because Leibniz is actually not a dualist. Leibniz is a substance monist who believes that the fundamental kind of thing that everyone is made out of, that everything is made out of, uh, are things that he calls monads. Now, I won't go into a big whole thing about Leibniz and his monads because that's a little bit beyond the scope of the course. But I just want you to keep in mind that Leibniz is not really a dualist. He's a monist. And the fundamental substance for Leibniz is monads. But don't worry about it beyond that. So, how can we respond if we wanted to respond to the introspection argument? Well, we could say, look, perception does not really reveal the world the way it is. Remember, we talked about direct realism and naive realism and representative realism and all of that. Maybe introspection doesn't reveal the world exactly the way it is in a similar way to how or introspection and perception are the same in that they don't reveal the actual nature of the things that we're perceiving. That's a clearer way to put it. So I can look at my coffee cup full of coffee, smell the coffee, and all the lovely things I can do with my coffee cup, but I can't see the atoms that make up the cup, right? I can't see the individual molecules that make up the coffee. So introspection might be a little bit like this too, right? Maybe when I look inside, kind of the converse of Leibniz's mill, right? If I could shrink myself down and walk around the brain, I would see only physical parts. I would see just neurons firing and neurotransmitters flowing around synapses and stuff. But I wouldn't see thoughts. I wouldn't see beliefs, desires, feelings. When I introspect, all I see or all I perceive are my thoughts, my inner impressions. But maybe those are just the neurons firing, right? Just because when I introspect, I don't uh, experience neural networks firing in various ways, doesn't mean that's not what my mental life ultimately consists of. So this doesn't really um, disprove dualism per se, but um, it should make us concerned about how reliable the introspection argument actually is. Now, there was another argument, the conceivability argument, which is a metaphysical argument. If I go back, well, we don't really have to, but yeah, this is one of the two arguments we want to consider. The conceivability argument in addition to the introspection argument. This is a metaphysical um, sort of claim that physicalists make. Physicalists say that the only thing that there is physical stuff. Therefore, the mind must be physical. But a dualist would say, hang on, it might be conceivable that the mind is non-physical. And if it's conceivable that the mind is non-physical, it's logically possible that the mind is non-physical. So what the dualist wants to do with the conceivability argument is show that it's logically possible for the mind to be made of a non-physical substance, for the mental to be, I don't know, mental substance or something like that. Now, we're talking about logical possibility here. Logical possibility is different from physical possibility, right? Crumley's example is the following, right? It's physically impossible to travel faster than the speed of light. We can't do it, right? The faster you go, for example, more massive you become, right? So if I'm just me, just regular old Josh going at, well, whatever regular speeds might be, I'm on this planet hurtling through space and the planet is spinning around. So I'm spinning around really fast on this planet, flying through space really, really fast. Okay, so I'm really not that slow. I'm actually going pretty fast. But it seems like I'm going slow because of my reference frame, etc. So I have a certain mass when I'm traveling at these more or less normal speeds, but the closer I go to the speed of light, um, the more massive I become. Um, the slower time seems to go for me within my reference frame. Um, it would be impossible to go faster than light because I would have infinite mass, which would require infinite energy to propel, which you can't do. Yeah, time dilation's pretty crazy, right? But for our purposes, it's the mass that makes it impossible, right? And by the way, right, I'm not a physicist, so if you have questions, more specific questions about this kind of thing, and you're taking a science class or a physics class specifically, ask your professor. But the point is, it's logically impossible for me to go faster than light. But or it's physically impossible for me to go faster than light. But it's not logically impossible, right? It's not logically contradictory to say, like, Josh is traveling faster than the speed of light, or Josh can travel faster than the speed of light. Um, it's not logically impossible. It's physically impossible. So here we're talking about logical possibility. And so again, to show that it's logically possible that the mind is non-physical, what the dualist wants to do is show that it's conceivable. And just like take note, like it's physically impossible to travel faster than light, but it is conceivable to travel faster than light. Therefore, it's logically possible to travel faster than light. A sort of conceivability argument for the logical possibility of faster than light travel might look something like that. And sure, I can conceive of traveling faster than light, right? I mean, science fiction certainly gives us lots of examples. You've got your warp speed, your hyperspace, your wormholes, and jump gates and various means of cheating the laws of physics and going faster than light in science fiction. So it's conceivable, therefore it's logically possible. All right, well, what about when it comes to the mind? This is Descartes' version. He doesn't spell it out exactly like this, but this is what you can kind of tease out of what he says in, for example, the Meditations when it comes to the nature of the mind. Um, Premise one: I can conceive of a mind existing separately from my body. Yeah, Descartes can certainly conceive of that. When you read his Meditations, um, Descartes uses lots of interesting. He gives us lots of interesting ways to imagine this. One is that, for example, he is not his body. He's a thinking thing. Remember, we get that from the demon argument. Ultimately, he is a thinking thing. But then if you look at like, um, further examples in the text, like the wax exercise, or when he's looking out at the square and um, judging that the people in the square are people and not robots, right? Um, it becomes very clear that Descartes conceives of the mental as something that might exist within a body or interact with a body, but that is not really the same kind of thing as the body. So Descartes can conceive of a mind existing separately from a body. That is premise one. Premise two: if I can conceive of something, then it's conceivable. Okay. And if it's conceivable, according to premise three, then it's possible, logically possible. Therefore, it's possible for a mind to exist separately from any body. And then the further couple of premises and conclusions are aimed at, explicitly saying that physicalism must be wrong. If it's possible for minds to exist separately from bodies, that's premise five, then physicalism is false. If physicalism is false, dualism must be true. Conclusion, dualism is true. That's the conceivability argument. Now, you may not agree with it, right? Is it really true? I mean, sure, just because something is conceivable, it's logically possible. Um, but just because something's logically possible, does that mean it's actually possible? I don't want to say physically possible, because remember, Descartes is trying to say, well, the mind is not physical. But what do we think? April?
Okay, so two things. Can we go back to the other side and just kind of like go through it quickly again? My cat came out of nowhere and jumped in my face and distracted
No
me.
problem.
Thank you.
So the first premise says if we can conceive of minds existing separately from bodies, right? Just as we could conceive of faster than light travel. So I can conceive that my mind could, like, I don't know, leave my body. Like if I had a near death experience or an out of body experience, I could conceive that the mind survives the death of the body, for example, or that perhaps that you could take my mind and upload it to a computer, maybe, right? So it's conceivable that a mind could exist separately from the body. And the second premise says that if something is conceivable, then it's logically or if I can conceive something, then it's conceivable. That's very straightforward. And
So,
if it,
okay, I have a friend. Okay, so friends of mine, their little got, anyway, long story short, very terrible car accident. The father passed away. The two kids survived. The little boy was internally decapitated.
oh my God.
And yeah, and when they had him in a coma, he said that he actually like saw his dad, and his dad said like, you got to go back, you got to be the man of the house, like it's okay, it's not your fault, like all of those things. So would that kind of fit in with this?
Well, that would be so if if you take that at his word, and if you were to believe um, that, for example, that it was the boy's father who was really speaking to him, then yes, that would be like yeah, you can conceive if you believe that experience is what's really going on, or reflects what's really going on, then yeah, then you're definitely capable of conceiving of a mind existing separately from a body. So if you can conceive of it, then it's conceivable. And the point is on this argument is if it's conceivable, it's possible. Therefore, it's possible for a mind to exist separately from a body. And if that's true, if that's true, then physicalism is false and dualism is true. So that's the idea, right? Let's just go to the chat. Yeah, Remy thinks the first point is kind of weak. The third point too. Well, yeah, and that's where you can take issue. You can take issue with multiple premises in this argument. Um, and yeah, like Remy says, the mind needs something. Like yeah, and I get it. I'm a physicalist, um, as well. So let's look at the problematic premises one at a time. Uh, I can conceive of a mind existing separately from a body, and if it's conceivable, if I can conceive it, it's conceivable, and if it's conceivable, it's possible. Well, I can conceive of all kinds of things, right? I can conceive of a winged horse. So okay, winged horses are logically possible, but I'm never going to go find one out in the wilderness, right? Um, as for the fifth premise, um, yeah, if it's possible for minds to exist separately, then physicalism's false. Well, because what we're assuming here is that bodies are physical, bodies include the brains. So if the mind is existing separately, physicalism is false. I suppose some kind of physicalist could deny this and say that, as we talked about last time, right? What if my body died physically, um, but I was able to somehow upload my mind to a computer and I mapped out all my neural connections and all the firing patterns and so forth, and I copied that information and put it in a computer program, and then I exist in the computer, um, while my brain then I don't know dies, right? Okay, well then that's still physicalism. Like if I'm existing in a computer, sure, now I'm ultimately ones and zeros instead of neurons firing, but that's still a physical environment that I exist in, right? Yeah, maybe there's a Pegasus out there. I agree. Yeah, Remy, I know it would be like making a copy, but yeah, the physical substrate part is what I want to emphasize. And yeah, like Kara says, well, that's the thing. There are a lot of leaps in this argument, right? So let's move on and talk about some of those. Um, So here it's kind of like the knowledge argument, right? What Descartes is trying to do is show that the possibility of a non-physical thing existing, in this case the non-physical mind, in Jackson's case non-physical facts, the possibility is enough to show that physicalism is false. So Descartes says, well, the only option left for us is substance dualism. But there are other options, right? We don't have to be a dualist or a physicalist. We could be an idealist. An idealist, remember, is also a substance monist who just thinks that there is only mind and mental substance. So you remember when we talked about Bishop Berkeley, George Berkeley? He was a factual phenomenalist or a subjective idealist. Um, everything is mind, right? Everything is idea. There's no physical stuff. This coffee cup right here is an idea. And we all exist kind of in the mind of God, as it were, who's always perceiving everything all the time, right? To be is to be perceived. Now, like a lot of you did, critics of this argument will focus on this conceivable to logically possible leap. Maybe, I mean, I don't think conceivability makes things actual. I won't say again physically, but actually possible, really possible. But maybe it doesn't even make things logically possible. There's a really interesting point in the chapter where Crumley talks about an old student of his um, who claimed that she could conceive of a square circle. Now, this doesn't make much sense. I cannot conceive of a square circle because, well, circles just aren't like that, right? Nor are squares. But let's say, for argument's sake, I can conceive of a square circle. Great. But a square circle is not logically possible, right? It just because definitionally it would not be a circle if it were square. So Kara asks, how is idealism different from factual phenomenalism? Well, subjective idealism is just another name for factual phenomenalism, for the idea that um, these phenomena are what are really real because they are these things that appear to us are other are all mental things that exist in the mind of God or whoever is perceiving everything all the time. For square circles. Well, if you make it small enough, I don't no, because maybe there'd be a difference in terms of us not being able to tell, but it's still two different shapes, right? Um, yeah, like Amy says, it would still have four sides of equal length, joined at right angles, for the square that is. So like maybe someone says like, oh, I can conceive of a square circle. Like here's a circle, but it's square. It doesn't make much sense to me because I can't conceive of it because it's not logically possible. But if you can, then great. But that just goes to show that you can conceive of things that are not logically possible, right? Or a great example would be like the writings of Lewis Carroll, okay? Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, right? Um Here's oh, I can't seem to change my slide. I don't really have this on the slide, but like Lewis Carroll, his day job was a logician. He was a logician. So logic puzzles, lots of stuff similar to what we do in this class. But in his stories, everything's weird and backwards, and up is down, and left is right, and Wonderland is not a logical place, right? So we can conceive of perhaps some kind of Wonderland where up is down, right? Okay, so maybe that's conceivable. Does that mean it's logically possible? Well, no, because up is not down, even though we can imagine it. We can imagine Alice in Wonderland with all this weird stuff going on that doesn't make any sense with, the Cheshire Cat and the Red Queen and everything, right? We can conceive of it, but it's not logically possible. Or maybe we can flip it around, right? Flip it around. Um, a lot of people a few centuries ago probably couldn't conceive of lightning as being identical to static electricity discharge, or what Crumley calls SED. So we'll call it SED, even though lightning really is like just a large scale, very powerful version of static electricity discharge, right? It's the same phenomenon ultimately. Like if you shuffle your feet across the carpet and touch something metal and there's a little spark. Well, that's really the same sort of thing that's happening with a lightning strike. Because I don't know, there's water molecules up there in the clouds rubbing together and getting charged up, and that charge has to go somewhere, so it goes down to the ground, right? But if you went back in time 500 years, you would not know. You might not be able to conceive of these being the same thing. So we could say, if we wanted to flip the conceivability argument around, lightning that is not static electricity discharge is conceivable because ancient peoples might have thought, even if they knew of static electricity, right? Like the ancient Greeks knew about static electricity. Um, their word for amber, the fossilized tree resin, like Jurassic Park kind of thing with the mosquito frozen in it. Their word for amber was Electra. Why? Well, because they knew that if you rubbed amber with a cloth or something, you could charge it up and, get a little static electricity spark, right? But of course, the lightning, the thunderbolt, well, that was from Zeus. That's a completely different thing. That's the gods, right? That's Zeus. Somebody's made Zeus mad and he's throwing his thunderbolts, right? So to them, in the deep, deep past, it would have been conceivable that lightning is not static electricity. And if it's conceivable, then it's possible. So it's possible for lightning to exist separately from static electricity discharge. And if it's possible for there to be lightning without static electricity discharge, then it must be false that lightning is static electricity discharge. But here's the thing. We know that lightning is static electricity discharge. So this conceivability argument means nothing, right? It's not a compelling argument. Like, okay, so what? Some people can conceive of lightning as, I don't know, Zeus's thunderbolt, right? So what? It's not. It's not that. It's static electricity discharge. So maybe we shouldn't be too compelled by the conceivability argument. And also, this is a point raised by Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia. How does the mental effects affect the physical? This is a problem that Descartes never really solved. How can my mental items, like, say, for example, my intention to brew some coffee this morning, cause me to actually go into my kitchen and start brewing the coffee? Put the kettle on, put some coffee in the French press, wait while the kettle boils, etc., etc. How does something non-physical affect the mental? And likewise, how can something um, or how can something non-physical, like the mental, affect the physical? And how can something physical affect the mental, right? How is it that these coffee molecules uh, cause me to experience this bitter taste of coffee, right? And why does coffee even taste the way it does and not some other way, right? We think of the taste being in here, but really the taste is like a mental representation that I have of the coffee. So how do my mental items cause me to physically go and make the coffee? And how do the physical characteristics of the coffee cause me to have certain experiences like the bitter taste, maybe the morning drowsiness goes away once I'm well caffeinated, right? Um, how do these two substances interact? This is the problem of causal interaction, or as it's more often called, the mind-body interaction problem. And Princess Elizabeth, pictured here with her hunting spear. So Elizabeth was, well, the technical term for Elizabeth was badass. So Elizabeth liked to go hunting, she liked to study philosophy, and she thought that Descartes had introduced a very, very serious problem here. So she's reading the meditations and she's like, well, hang on, how do these two substances interact? I need to get to the bottom of this. So she writes Descartes a letter to try and get him to explain all of this. Yeah, caffeine dependency. So maybe it's all physical, right? Like I get up in the morning and my brain in caffeine withdrawal just initiates the process. So I'm like this until I get the coffee, right? And maybe I'm like a zombie. I don't know. It's possible. Okay, so Princess Elizabeth writes him a letter, and she wants to know how can physical processes affect the mental, and how can mental processes affect the physical. Yeah, I need a couple of cups. Descartes was also a tutor to Queen Christina of Sweden, and she wanted to have her philosophy lessons really early in the morning. And it's Sweden, so there are long dark nights. It's in this cold castle, and Descartes. This is actually how he died. He got pneumonia um, from this cold, damp kind of environment. And the thing is that Descartes didn't even have coffee, right? Like imagine that. You got to get up at like 4 in the morning to go teach the Queen of Sweden philosophy in this cold, damp castle, and there isn't even any coffee. Um, nope. I get to lecture from my living room on the computer with coffee. I am very lucky. Descartes was not. So, how do the mental and physical interact? Well, Descartes argued that the interaction takes place via the pineal gland, which is a gland in the brain. Yeah. Well, I feel bad for him. He died young. I mean, he wasn't like young. He wasn't my age, but he wasn't like in his senior years, right? So Descartes says that we have our pineal gland, which is kind of like a locus of interaction between the mental and the physical. The body for Descartes is like a machine, like a an automaton. The nerves are kind of like wires, if you like. The joints are a bit like wheels, the muscles like pulleys. Um, and they're animated by the animal spirits. This sounds funny, but animal spirits just are like an animating, non-physical, kind of fluid-like, non-physical thing that flows through the joints and pushes and pulls on things and can be affected by the world impinging on the sense organs also affects them, and they flow to the pineal gland, and that's where the soul connects with the body and is affected by and also affects the animal spirits, which are in turn affected by or affect the body. That's how he thought it worked. Um, yeah, well, Remy, that's a good point. I mean, that's uh yeah, you have metacognition. So if I'm making a conscious effort to be aware of how much coffee I'm drinking, for example, um then that might then affect my behavior. Perhaps I try and drink less of it in the afternoons, right? And yeah, likewise, what I consume will affect the body. So that's an example of mind-body interaction, and that's a sort of physicalist account. Descartes, of course, was not a physicalist. Um, but here's the thing, right? Descartes, he kind of outlines how he thinks this all works, but he doesn't really explain how it works, right? Sure, okay, so like say if you touch me on my hand, then that affects my nerves, which affect the animal spirits, which flow to the pineal gland and affect my soul so that I feel the touch. Um, okay, but how are those things affecting one another, right? And so this is what Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia said. She said, "Excuse my stupidity in being able to comprehend from what you had previously said concerning weight, the idea by which we should judge how the soul, non-extended and immaterial, can move the body, nor why this power ought to persuade us that the body can be pushed by something immaterial any more than the demonstration of a contrary truth, as you promise in your physics, confirms in us the opinion of its impossibility." So, um, essentially, TLDR is, I'm sorry, Descartes, I don't understand how a physical substance is supposed to affect a non-physical substance or vice versa. Like, either it doesn't make sense or I'm dumb. And Elizabeth of Bohemia was not dumb. This is from this quote is not in Crumley. This is from another uh book on the mind by Jaegwon Kim. And in his chapter on Descartes, he quotes Elizabeth at length. And I really think Crumley might have used this quote instead. This might have been a better quote to use. She asked, "How the mind of a human being only a thinking substance, can determine the bodily spirits in producing bodily actions. For it appears uh, that all determination of movement is produced by the pushing of the thing being moved, by the manner in which it is pushed by that which moves it. or else by the qualification and figure of the surface of the latter. Contact is required for the first two conditions and extension for the third. These are physical properties, right? But you entirely exclude the latter from the notion you have of the soul, and the former seems incompatible with an immaterial thing. So, extension is required for um, affecting a physical thing. The soul doesn't have extension, and contact is required. But it seems weird to talk about a soul being in contact with something non-physical. So Princess Elizabeth is pointing out that the explanation that Descartes is giving us is just not a very good one. He doesn't actually explain how the mind and body interact. He explains more or less that the soul and the body interact, but not really how they interact. Thus, the mind-body interaction problem. Well, that's the end of that chapter. We better move on to the next one. Well, no, not the chapter, the slides. We're only halfway through the chapter. Let's get the other slideshow going. And if you have any questions thus far, pop them into the chat while I get more coffee. Wow. Yo yo. All right. Now, so that's our discussion of substance dualism. We focus mostly on substance dualism. We will talk a little bit about property dualism. But property dualism is actually a sort of physicalism. It's not a dualism about substance, right? Substance dualism says there is physical substance, and then there's mental substance, and there are two fundamentally different kinds of substance. Now, property dualism says that there is only one kind of substance, physical substance, but that there could be different sorts of properties that it has. So it could have physical properties like mass, extension, but arranged in the right way, it also might have mental properties like thoughts. Think of it this way. Think of it like, and I think this comes from Julien Offray de la Mettrie talking about John Locke. Uh, he's got this quip about matter being able to tell time. Um, matter has properties like extension, mass, and so forth, solidity, physical properties. But suitably arranged, matter can also do something pretty cool. It can tell time. How? Well, you make a clock out of it. So suitably arranged, matter might also have the property of reckoning time. Similarly, matter suitably arranged, perhaps in a brainy sort of way, can also think, right? So we're going to talk about physicalism today, for the rest of today. We'll have to finish this off next week, I'm sure. But let's talk about varieties of physicalism, which of course says that everything is physical. Now, there's one type of physicalism called eliminativism or eliminative materialism. Sometimes you hear it referred to that way, and it denies that our mental terms terms like belief, desire, all of those terms. The eliminativists, it's a mouthful, deny that those terms refer to real things. So that's kind of an extreme position, right? A hardcore eliminative materialist might say something like, let's stop talking about beliefs and desires. Let's just talk about brain states, right? And let's get rid of that mentalistic talk. It's not clear, it's not helpful. Let's just stop doing it, right? Let's talk about the brain rather than the mind. We'll get rid of the mind and talk about the brain, right? Or a behaviorist is another example. If you're a behaviorist, um, you either deny the existence or the importance of the mental, and you focus on behavior and on these chains of association, between stimulus and response. But, a lot of physicalists don't want to go that way. They want to say, actually, um, the mental talk of the mental is quite helpful and refers to something real. So we can distinguish between these reductive and non-reductive varieties of physicalism, right? Non-reductive physicalists, excuse me, a non-reductive physicalist might say, "Hey, you know what? There are mental states. Sure, the mind is ultimately physical in nature, in that it arises out of the activity in the brain. Um, but beliefs, desires, thoughts, intentions, emotions, perceptions. These are all important ideas that we should retain, right? Unlike the eliminative materialists or the behaviorists. So there are these reductive and non-reductive varieties. Let's look at reductive physicalism first. So often this gets taught as identity theory, specifically type identity theory. On this view, the mind is the brain. That's it. The mind is just the brain. The mind is identical to the brain. So mental states like my desire to have some coffee, my belief that there is some coffee right here, lucky me. Descartes didn't have any coffee. Those things can interact and cause me to reach out and pick up the cup and take a sip, as I just did. What an identity theorist would say, a type identity theorist, they would say that all of those states, my beliefs and my desires, are ultimately just brain states. So we identify mental states with brain states. And it's type identity theory because each type of mental state is identified with a type of brain state. So, say, for example, take my belief that Ottawa is the capital of Canada. That's a type of brain state, and it's the same type of brain state that you have if you believe that Ottawa is the capital of Canada. My desire to have some coffee, that is the same type of brain state as your desire to have coffee, right? So that's type identity theory, where types of mental states are identified with types or kinds of brain states. Are we following along with identity theory so far? Nobody's like, "Oh, I don't know." Right? We're good. Good. Yeah. Good, good. It's pretty straightforward, right? I mean, why would we be tempted to some kind of reductive physicalism, such as type identity theory? Well, we do seem to have a sort of dualism of in terms of our way of talking about the mind and the brain, right? We have a sort of common sense vernacular about beliefs and desires, but we also have a neuroscientific one too. Um, each each vernacular, though, ultimately refers to the brain. Um, no, it's not. Not really. you can identify and then reduce, but we're not pushing it that far just yet. Um, so so I guess I should clarify, like there are reductive theories, um, and then there are theories that are reductive and eliminativist. So this is a reductive theory. It's a theory that reduces the mental to the physical, but it doesn't eliminate the mental. But then there are theories like eliminative materialism that reduce and eliminate. They don't just reduce, right? So, we have this vernacular, just to get back to what I was saying. We have this neuroscientific vernacular and a sort of folk psychological vernacular. Um, and the more we learn about our brain, the more we can replace perhaps our common sense vernacular with a scientific vernacular. Um, so this is why this one is reductive. Whether it's eliminative or not, well, that's up to you whether you want to be an eliminativist or not. But here, what we're doing is we are reducing things like beliefs and desires to types of brain states. And the important thing to note is that when we reduce in this way, we don't actually lose the ability to explain anything, right? Like you can explain my behavior by saying that Josh is experiencing caffeine withdrawal, but he believes that there's some coffee in the kitchen, and he um, desires um, to eliminate his caffeine withdrawal by consuming something with caffeine in it. And so that explains why Josh went to go get some coffee in the kitchen, make a pot of coffee. But that's fine. But you can also talk about it in terms of like neurons firing, right? And you don't lose your ability to explain anything. So what kind of evidence do people invoke for identity theory? Well, it's fairly straightforward, right? For a long time, we've known that damage to certain areas of the brain results in specific cognitive deficits, right? I think I've mentioned, for example, Phineas Gage. I know I've talked about him in my other class, but have I mentioned the case of Phineas Gage in this class? Maybe someone can remind me. Or if we haven't, then maybe somebody could tell me about Phineas Gage. Anyone? Okay, maybe I haven't mentioned it, but yeah, you're right. Karen and Noamine, the head injury. So Phineas Gage was, by all accounts, fairly cheerful, nice guy, railway foreman who worked in the 19th century. Yeah, maybe I did mention it briefly. Yeah, if you're a psych student, you definitely know. Yeah, okay, so maybe I did mention it. But yeah, Phineas Gage, was this kind of really nice Ned Flanders sort of character. And then one day when he's working on the railroad, there's an explosion in one of the holes where they pack down the explosives. And Gage is using a tamping iron to tamp the explosives. Big long metal rod, basically. But an accident occurred and the explosives went off and the rod went through his head. Um, Went through his frontal area, like his, I think it was his orbitofrontal cortex that was affected. Anyway, he survived, but his personality was changed. Um, so that's one example. Also, we know that like with strokes, like if you have a stroke that affects Broca's area, you can develop something called Broca's aphasia, which is an inability, which is a difficulty with speech output. If you have a stroke in Wernicke's area, you can develop Wernicke's aphasia, which concerns difficulties with speech input, right? So different parts of the brain seem to be responsible, or if not responsible, implicated in certain cognitive tasks, and damage to those areas results in pretty specific cognitive deficits, right? Yeah, I guess depending on where the tumor is, right? Could have a tumor, I don't know, on your somewhere in your insula or your amygdala, perhaps, that might affect you in this way. And yeah, there are lots of examples. I mean, the history of neurology as a medical discipline is kind of like it's basically the history of this person has this brain injury and has lost this ability. This person has this brain injury and has lost this ability. And we've worked out what areas seem to be implicated in what processing um, because of a whole lot of brain injuries, right? So, what does this matter to us? Well, when it comes to deciding how to make sense of, I don't know, cases of brain damage, uh, what's simpler? Well, probably a world where there's just one kind of substance and not two, right? Phineas Gage had severe brain damage and his personality was changed. We don't need the brain damage and some kind of, I don't know, soul damage to explain the change in personality, right? It just makes sense to say, okay, well, the brain is what is damaged, and because the mind is identified with the brain, well, now we're seeing a difference in the mind. And that's because the mind just is the brain. The mental states just are brain states, right? And another reason is that science is very successful. It gives us every day more and more information about the physical world. And if dualism is true, then science can't really tell us anything about the mind. It would be sad if dualism were true. Well, maybe some people would be happy about it because it might imply like life after death, right? So some people would be happy with that. But scientists, neuroscientists, for example, might be a bit disappointed because they'd all be out of a job. Um, well, not necessarily. People would just say that, well, Mr. Scientist, what you have told me about is the brain, not the mind, right? But given how successful science is, it's reasonable to believe that physicalism is true because science studies physical phenomena. That's what it does, right? It studies um, only physical phenomena, matter, energy, natural phenomena. That's it. It does not study anything else. Yeah, I say let those neuroscientists keep on neurosciencing. And I think that what they learn about the brain will help us understand more about the mind, right? I don't know. I was talking about this in my other class, Christine, and it's an interesting question. And the conclusion that I sort of came to for the afternoon was that I think it depends on what kind of afterlife we're talking about. Like, am I? And I'm going to say something that might sound a little um, provocative, although I don't mean to be provocative, but some afterlife where you're just like I don't know, heaven, where you're just like praising God for eternity does not sound ideal to me, right? Neither does hanging around on Earth as a ghost, right? Like, okay, there's life after death, but really you're just a ghost and you hang around creepy old houses making noise. Like, I don't want that. That doesn't sound fun. Yeah, that's true, Cormac. It doesn't really follow the laws of physics, right? But I don't know if the afterlife was like, okay, you have graduated and now you get to learn the secrets of the universe. Yeah, man, that sounds pretty cool. Um, but unfortunately, I don't think that's how it works, because I am a physicalist. So I think that once I'm dead, I'm dead. Um, right, but what if but like that sucks though. Like say that's true, Kaya, and I'm like, okay, I'm dead. I'm gonna go to the afterlife. But then it's like I gotta finish doing a thing here, and but I'm limited in how I can do it because now I'm non-physical and I can't affect anything. Like I don't want to be. I don't want that. That sounds not fun, right? That sounds like a terrible way to do the afterlife. Yeah, I'd be mad. I'd be mad, right? I'd be like, what? I thought I was finished with this. You know? It's like um well, having to accept death, I mean, sure, but I mean, like, okay, why is it hard to accept that you've died? I don't know. I guess a lot of people, I mean, if you think about it, one of the reasons why it might be hard to accept death, I mean, it's hard to accept the biological reality of death, which is why humans tend to have worldviews that protect against the fear of death. So then you would think that accepting death would be easier, so that there should not be ghosts, I guess. So I don't know. I'm just saying, all I'm saying is I wouldn't want to be hanging around as a ghost, nor would I want to be in an afterlife praising some god forever and ever and ever. Okay, I'm behind in the chat. I wasn't looking when I was saying that. Yeah, that's true. I guess I've forgotten about reincarnation. Abdul Wahab doesn't want to keep learning when okay, yeah, fair. You're dead, you're dead. Uh Enjoy the afterlife. Why do I gotta keep studying, right? Well, Justina, that's a good example of dualism. So like on Catholicism, and Descartes was a Catholic, right? So the body dies, but the soul lives. And then maybe like depending on the tradition, your body is resurrected later. Um I suppose I get the point. Like Kaya, I get the point. I just don't think I agree with it, right? Um, I like again, I'm a physicalist. I think that ultimately what I am is um an embodied brain embedded in a physical world. Um, that's ultimately what I think I am and what the human being is. Um, But I'm just saying, we always get on an afterlife tangent. I guess the possibility of an afterlife is interesting to everyone, but um, yeah, I guess my point is that different possible afterlives are more or less interesting to me, even though I don't think that there are any, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Now, so if we want an ontologically simpler world, and we want to, science works. So let's go with what the science tells us. Yeah, I think so. Lights go out. Unless perhaps I can get uploaded to a computer. Which also, I mean, hey, if we're talking about crappy afterlives, there's one. Um, because like someone said in the chat earlier, if I say I'm dying and I upload my mind to a computer, then am I not just a copy now? Is that really me in the computer? There's a Black Mirror episode about this. Anyone seen that show, Black Mirror? If you're still struggling for an essay topic to identify a topic for your essay, watching Black Mirror is a good way to get some inspiration. Yeah, like imagine that. Like, well, that's like that show. I think it's called Upload. There's a show on Amazon Prime like that where there is a digital afterlife and but you have to pay to get into like the good heaven. Um, and the poor people like their bandwidth is limited, so they only get to be conscious for a few minutes out of a month and then they just freeze and yeah, it's wild. Um, um, so but for Black Mirror, um yeah, there's movies, Lucy and different things. There's movies, but the episode of Black Mirror I'm talking about specifically is the San Junipero episode, right? Where, and I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but it's a really interesting story because you're kind of like, well, what's happening here, right? Like, because we seem to be in different times and places, and what actually we're in a kind of digital afterlife, and there's one woman who lives there because she's I think she's like in a coma, like in a coma, and then there's another person who uh goes there to visit or something. But anyway, they decide they're going to yeah, yeah, a little bit, Kara. And anyway, they decide that when they die, they're going to be uploaded and they're going to spend the rest of their lives together, and it's big happy ending. Um, but I keep thinking to myself, like, are they really them? Are they copies? Can you even upload a mind to a computer? Would a computer simulated me feel, or would I be the equivalent of a digital zombie? Um, yeah, that's right, because the guy is a mean captain. He's like a mean, brutal ship's captain, and he's mean to the crew, but then in real life he's meek and yeah, that's another good one. So, that's kind of what's going on here, uh, in terms of crappy afterlives. Yeah, right, right. Or do you need a brain? An identity theorist, actually, a type identity theorist would say these are all brain states. You couldn't do this in a computer, right? You need a brain to have pain, pleasure, um, to feel a cold, crisp wind on a winter's morning, to smell a rose, to experience the bitter taste of coffee, to feel the mirth when you're in a room hanging out with your friends. You need a brain. You can't do it on a computer because a computer state is not a brain state, right? So anyway, how could a dualist respond to some of the motivations for identity theory? The ontological simplicity and the success of science. How could they respond? Yeah, a healthy brain, of course. I mean, maybe I couldn't upload my brain to a computer, but maybe you could, maybe if my body dies, you could take my brain out and put it in a vat. Hillary Putnam has the brain in the vat argument. You could keep the brain alive and feed it experiences. I don't know. Anyway, identity claims are pretty strong. Yeah, like the Futurama heads. You get fed fish food. Like, so identity claims are strong. like saying that, a mental state like believing there is I don't know, believing that there is a cat, which there is, believing that there's a cat right here on my couch, um, is really just a brain state, right? Right, sir? Yes. So, um, that's a pretty strong claim to say that that brain state is identical with that mental state, right? But if we could show that there's a difference here, if we could show that there's something true of minds but not true of bodies, then we could falsify type identity theory. So maybe mental states have characteristics that brain states do not have. Things like intentionality and phenomenology. Maybe, um, my mental state and my belief that there is a cat on the couch, it has content, namely that there is a cat on the couch, but my neurons firing, realizing this mental state, do they have content? The neurons don't know what a cat is. I know what a cat is, but groups of neurons don't. Or phenomenology, right? There's something that it's like to give this fella a pet, right? He's very fuzzy. And if I keep doing this, he'll get really um, he won't let me stop. He'll just be all over me. But there's something that it's like, right? There's something that this cat feels like, but his brother, he feels different. His fur feels different, right? Um, do brain states have phenomenology? It doesn't seem like it, perhaps, to some people. Then again, maybe one day we will be able to explain uh, phenomenology and intentionality physically. What about non-reductive physicalism? Here's where we get into functionalism, and I think that we'll probably try and wrap discussion up on this slide. But where type identity theory says that mental states just are brain states, there are varieties of non-reductive physicalism that don't seek to do this. Why? Well, I mean, one of the things that I think I didn't emphasize strongly enough was that type identity theory is really concerned with human brain states. So much so that um, it might limit certain mental states just to people when we would want to say that, we wouldn't want to deny that non-human animals have mental states. Um, if there were, if on some other planet there exists some form of life kind of like us that thinks and feels and has technology. But we wouldn't want to deny that those aliens have mental states, even if their physiology was radically different from ours. Like they might have maybe the equivalent of a brain, but it would look radically different from a human brain, and we wouldn't want to deny that they have mental states. Or maybe really sophisticated computers could have mental states. So it's conceivable to a lot of people that maybe one day there will be very powerful AI or robots, and that these things we could characterize as having mental states, right? Even though they don't have brains at all. So you can have a brain that is kind of similar to a human, but not the same, like perhaps the brain of a non-human animal. A brain that's completely different, like that of an alien, or one that's, a brain that's not a brain at all, like a robot. But we might not want to deny that those things could have mental states. So maybe we can't reduce types of mental states to types of brain states. This is called the multiple realizability objection to type identity theory. Mental states can be realized by lots and lots of different kinds of brain states, or indeed maybe even physical states that have nothing to do with brains. So that's why now a lot of people are not type identity theorists. Rather, they are functionalists. And a functionalist is somebody who says that mental states are defined in terms of their functional roles, and not how they're realized, not how they're implemented. So that means that minds are multiply realizable. I have a mind, but so does this fellow behind me on the couch. Sure, it's a very different kind of mind, right? I'm interested in philosophy. He's interested in lounging on the couch and playing with catnip toys and so forth. I can talk about this fella having mental states. I mean, he asks all the time to go outside to sit on the balcony, right? Every time I pass by the door, he looks at me, meows, and then looks at the door. So I could say that he has a desire to go sit on the balcony, even though it's not like a linguistically formatted propositional attitude like a human being might have, right? Right, sir? No propositional attitudes. Well, we could still treat them as propositional attitudes, right? Hmm? No? Oh, fair enough. Um, it's just that, I can express it linguistically doesn't mean that he's literally thinking, I would like to go outside. Um, but I can make sense of that. I can attribute a mental state to him like, oh, he wants to go sit outside on the balcony and watch the leaves fall off the trees and so forth. But he's got a very different brain than what I've got. So maybe mental states like desires are multiply realizable. They can be realized in a human brain or a non-human animal's brain. Yeah, he is here for the lecture, but I think he just likes to be around me, you know? Although I don't know if cats could do philosophy, what would they philosophize about? Will you tell me? No, he's now interested in the goings on outside, aren't you? Where's your brother, huh? Is he hanging out upstairs? Oh, he's very purry this morning, purring lots and lots. So that's a functionalist, right? Um, uh, just before we go, the multiple realizabilities, pay attention to this multiple realizability idea, right? It's the idea that you can realize something in different physical stuff. The example that I always use is a calculator, right? Like when I was in school, we had actual pocket calculators, or when we got into high school, we got graphing calculators. I actually have my own graphing calculator because I'm cool like that. But it was a physical calculator that you'd hold in your hand. It had a circuit board, and you do push the numbers, and that's one way to have a calculator. Okay, is to have like an actual hardwired calculator. But of course, that's not the only way to have a calculator, right? Like on my phone, I have, just like you, I have the virtual calculator. This is just a software calculator. It's just a computer program that runs on this phone. Or I could have an abacus, right? You know those things with the little beads that you slide to and fro and you can do mathematical calculations that way if you know how. That's a calculator. Or a slide rule. Like if you're watching those old-timey space movies like Apollo 13, and everybody in NASA is trying to do the calculations to get Tom Hanks and everybody back on Earth, and they're using slide rules. That's another way to do calculations. Calculators are multiply realizable, just like minds and mental states are multiply realizable on functionalism. Yes. Yes, the quiz is due tomorrow. Don't forget. And Cooper, to answer your question, uh it covers no, it has the same number of questions. So it has four short written answer questions, and it has 10 mostly multiple choice, but a few true false. You have 90 minutes to complete it, just like last time. It's open book, which means you can use your learning materials. You may not use Google, Chat GPT. You cannot copy and paste from anything. Okay, so none of that. It's due tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. and it covers our units on perception, on universals, and things. So not this nature of the mental stuff. Well, I'm not reviewing essays before they're due because in the interest of fairness, I'd have to review everybody's, and I can't do that. I just don't have the time. I would take it to writing services, and have them give it a look over for you. Or alternatively, you can go on the Discord server and just put the word out like, hey, I'm looking for somebody who might like to read over my essay, maybe give it a proofread, tell me what they think. And if you read mine, I'll read yours, right? And you can do like an essay exchange and help each other out. Help each other out that way. But yeah, I would do that or writing service. I wish I could read it. It's just then in the interest like it just wouldn't be fair. You know what I mean? But yeah, okay, so that's the test, that's the essay. So the test is due tomorrow, 1 minute to midnight. The essay is due next Friday at 11:59 p.m. Oh, and in regards to the quiz, before I start marking, um, yeah, I'm really going to be on the lookout for AI usage this time. Um, so yeah. I have a feeling that the people who are here every day, uh, I don't have to worry about you guys. It's the people that never show up and somehow write perfect answers, that I have to worry about. So anyway, I'll see you all next week. We'll finish talking about the nature of the mental, and then we'll get on to our next topic. Okay. And of course, let me know if you're working on your essays and you have any questions. Like I said, I can't really read drafts, but if you have a question about something, I can certainly try and answer it. All right. So, I hope you all have a good rest of your week and a good weekend, and I'll see you all on Tuesday. Bye for now.